We're going to be going over real basic Macs interface stuff. So kind of what some of these buttons mean, how to use the interfaces, how to make some basic shapes, how to move things around, how to save stuff, just basic kind of boilerplate stuff to get going in this program. And this would usually be the video that you would watch first if you've never watched any of the other videos, and usually after about the first week of class. Okay, let's go over some parts of Macs here. This button up here, these are your menu items, and a lot of these buttons we won't get to until later in the class. A few of them you won't get to until the animation class. These buttons over here are your reactor buttons or dynamics buttons. We won't get to these at all in the class. If you're interested in these, your book covers them, or you might get to these in animation and the camera techniques class that come later down the line. These are your tabs over here. You can click on these, and each one of these little tabs rolls out another rollout menu item here. You can see they change. We cover this tab, this one, this one, this one, and this one in class. Mostly these two. We do get into these a little bit, but mostly these two tabs. So you'll see me coming over here and clicking on these tabs a lot. Most of the items we use in the first few weeks in the class are located under the Create tab or the Modify tab, which is this one. Okay? These big gray areas here are called the viewports. And if you're familiar with isometric views, these three views here, front, top, and left, are isometric views, meaning they show you a straight-on view. So you're looking straight down, straight from the side or the front, and straight from the side or the front here. This view here, which by default is the perspective view, that is so that you can look at the object from more than one side. And it's very common to work down here in perspective to move the object around and then select from these three views once you get used to what you're looking at. Okay? These buttons down here are your viewport controls. We're going to come back to those in a little bit once we get something in the viewports to control. And this area down here at the bottom is your animation keyframing area. All right? Okay, let's do some basic making of some stuff, and then we'll get into how to move those things around. Under the Create tab, which is this little arrow with a star, and you can click on Geometry, which is this little guy here. And by clicking on them, you left-click with the mouse. So I'm left-clicking with the mouse, and click on this button. You'll see that it turns yellow when you click on it. And I want this one that looks like a little sphere. This is a drop-down menu here, and I want it to say Standard Primitives, which is the default. And here's all your standard primitives that you get a choice of. We're going to go through these real quick on how to make these objects. We'll start with a box. Now, I'm going to tell you what buttons I'm clicking on the mouse. There's a little bit of a trick to making these things. It's just a matter of which mouse button you click on. I'm going to hold down the left mouse button and drag, and that's going to make the bottom of my box. You can see it down there in the perspective view. Then I'm going to let go of the left mouse button and push the mouse up on the mouse pad. And then I'm going to click down the left mouse button again, and then I can move my mouse. Everything's done, and I've made a box. Okay? Now, if you'd like to rotate or move your box around, we're going to go down here real quick to these viewport controls, and you'll see how they work. We'll just go in order here. This one, which looks like a little magnifying glass, if I hold down the left mouse button in any viewport, it will zoom. And I'm holding down the left mouse button and pushing the mouse up and down on the keypad. Not left and right, but up and down. Okay? This one that's next to it zooms all. So it basically does the same thing. It's just all the viewports will move in tandem. I don't use this one very much. I use this zoom quite a bit. The one next to it, which looks like a little box, that's zoom extents. Whatever viewport is selected, and I'm left clicking on each viewport to highlight it in yellow. That's the first thing you do before selecting the object, is choose which viewport you want to select. So I'm left click in the viewport, and then zoom extents, and it will fit your object into the viewport. So if you've zoomed around and you're too close, you can hit this little box and it will zoom everything back to fit. Okay? The next button is exactly the same. Anytime you see that little grid behind the object in the button, that means all viewports, and that's zoom extents all, and if you click that, everything will snap so you can see it. I tend to use these two buttons a lot. So if you get to moving things around and you can't see your objects anymore, you can just hit this object and everything will come back, or this button. Okay, down on the bottom row, zoom region is if you just want to zoom into a certain area. And you can see that I could zoom into the corners of these boxes just by left clicking and dragging. So I'm holding down the left mouse button and then letting go. Alright, that's this button here. And once everything gets all out of whack, you can hit the zoom extents all and everything will come back. The little hand here is your pan view, just like Photoshop. I'm holding down the left mouse button as I move, so I still have the mouse button held down. This one is rotate. We tend to use these a lot. The rotate with the little yellow circle in the middle, looks like a little clock. If I hold down the left mouse button and I aim into this kind of yellow circle here, think of this as a little trackball. Wherever I grab in that little trackball determines how I can rotate this box. If I grab outside the trackball, it doesn't work as well. See, it kind of flips around. But if I grab inside this yellow circle and hold down the left mouse button with this button depressed, then I can rotate my object around. You're going to need to rotate objects around a lot, so practice that. Now the little button with the yellow circle in it means that it rotates around the selected object. Now we've selected our box, so it's rotating around the selected object. That's by far the most useful one, I think. If I hold down the left mouse button over the button here, there's actually three others. There's a white one, a little white center one, and what that will do is basically the same thing, except that if I had more things selected, it would rotate around all of those things. This one rotates around the scene. So if you're just looking for one to keep things easy for a few days while you get used to the program, use the one with the yellow center. Okay? And this last one, any viewport that I have selected, so right now I'm right-clicking on the viewports, and what right-clicking does is it selects the viewport without changing your selection. So left-click just selects the viewport. Right-clicking selects the viewport but doesn't change your selection. Now we only have one thing here to select, so that's not a big deal, but it becomes a big deal later. And this little button here, which is your viewport maximize toggle, if I select perspective and hit it, it will make that screen become the whole screen. Okay, and it's very common to zoom into a screen, work on it, and then go back out, select another screen and go back in, go back out, select another screen and go back in. All these viewport controls work the same whether it's been toggled as maximized or minimized. Okay, and I'll put this back as the default 4-screen setting. So those are your screens. Now we're going to go back to, I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. We're going to go back to our primitive objects. We have a box that we've made. I'm going to make a sphere next. In my top viewport, I'm going to left click and drag out a sphere, and then I'm going to unclick the button. So you left click, hold down the button, drag out the sphere, and you'll make a sphere. A cylinder, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click down on the left mouse button. I'm holding down the left mouse button. Unclick the left mouse button and push the mouse up on the keypad. So push the mouse up. and then left click again when it's tall enough, and we've made a cylinder. A torus is like a big jelly donut. I'm going to left click, holding down the left mouse button, and drag it out, pushing up and down on the mouse. Unclick, and that will give you your thickness. Again, I'm pushing up and down on the mouse, and then click again when you get it the way that you want it. A teapot will make a teapot. Yep, it's actually a teapot, and it's just a one-click thing. You just click and drag. We'll come back to why there's a teapot there in a while. The cone, we drag out, left-click, holding down the left mouse button, unclick and push up, and then click again with the left mouse button, and that will pinch it in on the top, and then let go of the left mouse button. So you get the idea. You're pretty much just clicking the left mouse button on and off between dragging and setting. A geosphere just makes a regular sphere. I'm going to skip that. A tube, left click, hold down and drag. Unclick and push up or down with the mouse. Click down again and push up with the mouse, and it will make a tube, so it's hollow. A pyramid, same thing. You probably get the idea by now, and you can make these your own. When you're all done, plane is the last one, and that's just a flat plane, like a piece of paper, and all it is a left click, drag, and we're going to make a ground object so that all of our objects are on the ground. And I've unclicked the button when I'm done, and I've made a plane object. So if you're following along, go ahead and make this scene, because we're going to align these and play with the settings next. So if you want to turn off the video or pause it right here, you can make this scene, make one of each of the objects, and then come back to the video. Okay, so you've got this scene in place. Now we're going to play with the parameters of each of these primitives. I'm going to start with the sphere. You can see the sphere isn't on the ground plane. Here in my front view or left view, you can see the sphere and the torus are sunk down below the ground plane. We want to get them up on the ground plane. Now, if you made the object and didn't do anything else, your parameters would be listed right here under Standard Primitives. If you've clicked on anything else, they've moved over to Modify. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Modify, because that's probably what you have right now, and then I'm going to come back to that in a second, and I'll show you what I mean by the parameters moving. In any case, click on the sphere, so you left click on the sphere, practice clicking in your viewport. So go to the right mouse button, and you can see if you click in the viewport, the sphere still stays selected no matter what viewport you select. If you left click, the sphere gets deselected, and Max will wait for you to select something else. So if I select the tube, I can right click, and it stays selected. If I select the teapot and left click, it unselects it. Okay? There's only 2 mouse buttons, so try that with both mouse buttons and you'll get the hang of it. Okay, back to our sphere. Now here's my parameters. These are the settings for each primitive. They're all different for every primitive. The radius setting controls how big it is. To change this, I'm holding down the left mouse button and pushing the mouse up and down. Don't click on it repeatedly. It'll take forever. Just hold down the left mouse button and move your mouse up and down. It's like a little slider. The segments control how many polygons are in it. You can select this all the way down to only a few, or you can bump it up and make it more polygonal or rounder. Smoothing, we're going to not worry about that for right now. That's a rendering issue. Hemisphere will actually chop our sphere in half. You can see I can chop it in half right up to the ground plane there. Or I can make it go higher. Makes like a dome if you do it this way. I'm going to leave it as a sphere. You can also go down here to base to pivot, and if you check this box, our sphere will bounce up and be right on the ground plane. That's because it's pivot, which is this object right here, these arrows, will move to the bottom. Okay? Now that we know how to do that, let's click the torus, which is the other one that's below the ground plane. Under Modify tab, you'll find the parameters for the torus. They look different. You can see that I can change the radius setting here, just like we did when we made it. I can make it bigger or smaller. Again, I'm holding down the left mouse button and moving. I can twist it, even though there's really nothing to twist right now, but I could twist it. Also, if you want to get these numbers back to normal, you can hit, say, 0 in this case, and then enter, and that'll change it. So you can do it by the keypad too. Segments will add more segments. Sides will add more rings to it. I'm going to now move this object up to the ground plane, and I'm going to go to my Move button, which is right here. Click it on, so it turns yellow when you click it on with the left mouse button. I'm going to right-click in a viewport, like left or front, where I can see where the ground plane is. And I'm going to grab this arrow here and just move it up until it sits right on the ground plane. Okay? If you can't see it, remember Zoom Extents All is down here in the bottom corner, and you can click that so that you can see everything. Alright? You can do that with any of these other objects. You'll see that all the parameters are under the Modify tab. You can change the parameters in any object. They're all different, and it's easier just for you to go play with them if you want. Okay? You can do that now if you want to turn off the video and go ahead and play with them. Otherwise, our next goal is going to be to move the Move tool. Move these objects so that they're not overlapping each other. Okay? I'm going to go to the Move tool. Again, you just left click on it. It should turn yellow. And you're going to right click on the viewport that you want to use. That'll keep whatever is selected. Much easier way of working. Get used to that left and right clicking of the viewports. I'm going to click on these different objects, and using the top viewport, I'm going to move them so they're not overlapping. Now, a couple things about moving. If you move by grabbing the arrows, it'll lock that object onto an axis. Now, that's pretty common. You can do that. Or there's this big square here in the middle, and what that does is if I left click and hold down, it locks the object to 2 axes. You can see down here that it's not moving below the ground plane. It's sticking to the ground plane, but I'm just moving it around like I'm moving on a table. And for what we're doing, that's probably the best thing to use to make sure everything is nice and spaced out. And now all my objects, whoops, my pyramid here needs some help. He's kind of hanging off the table. There we go. All my objects are now on the table, and none of my objects are colliding or overlapping with each other. Okay? Now, a couple other things. If I right-click in the perspective viewport and I'll grab my sphere, I can grab that same little yellow triangle and hold down the left mouse button, and it will move in the perspective viewport. You see it's reacting the same as what it did before. Now, there are other 2-axis handles here. There's in the perspective viewport. You can see them lighting up over here. And what that would do is move this around in the other 2 axes, which isn't really what we want. Okay? If you do anything that you don't like, this arrow up here is the undo arrow. You just click that, and it will go right back to where it was. Okay? Alright. A couple more arrows up here for us. This is the redo arrow, which will actually redo whatever we just did, which we had just undone. So I'm going to hit undo. This arrow right here is the select and rotate key, which works very similar to the move key, except this time you get these rings. I'm going to grab the teapot because you can see that rotate. And if I just grab this ring that's going around it, this yellow ring, and hold down the left mouse button, it will rotate the teapot while locking it on one or the other 2 axes. Okay, you can actually rotate it on any axis by grabbing these little things. And if you get things all skewed out of place, you hit undo, until it goes back to what you want. You have 30 undos. So almost unlimited undos unless you keep clicking on stuff and you burn up your 30 undos. Scale works very similar to the others in that if you grab either the handle, it will scale along that axis, or you can grab this little middle triangle here and scale on all axes. That's pretty common. Or you can grab this little band right here and it will scale just on 2 axes. You can see the height isn't changing over here when I do that. Okay? So select and move, select and rotate, and select and scale. These 3 right here. The select button is right here, and you can select using the select button, or you can use one of these 3, and with these 3 selected, you can still select stuff. That's why it's called select and move. This one is just select. Okay? This button here is select by name. If you're having trouble finding an object, you can click on that. You can see everything in your scene is laid out here. If I want to select the sphere, I double click on it and the sphere is selected. If I want to double click on, or if I want to select the tube, I double click on it and the tube is selected. This button here is your selection type. By now you've probably been clicking on these. You probably didn't know that you can drag around objects and select more than one. There are different ways to drag around. I'm going to left click and drag, just like in Photoshop. Drag around the whole scene and everything's selected. Drag around just these objects here and you'll get the plane, the bottom, ground, and these 2 because that's what my box touched. You'll see anything that it touches gets selected. If you want to select everything except the ground plane, go to a different view. Select everything but the ground plane, and now the ground plane isn't selected. Alright. There are different types of selection. Box is the one I always use. I really don't use any other, but we'll go through them. Circular. Hold down the left mouse button, it makes circles. Don't find that one very useful. This one is just like in Photoshop's straight edge selection, in that if you need to get around in sharp corners, you can. The left mouse button is what you click to use that. This one here works the same way, except that I draw a selection. And I don't use this one very much, even though it's very cool. So let's say I just want to get the circle and the purple thing and the ground plane. I can, if I'm close enough, there we go. I can get all those. That's this one that looks like a little pond or a little kidney bean. And then this one, the bottom one, is kind of fun. Again, I don't use it much, but if you hold down the left mouse button, you can paint your selection. So I'm holding down the left mouse button. Okay? So I usually use box even after showing you all those neat ones. Good old-fashioned box seems to work best for me. This button right here is called window crossing, and with it turned on, or yellow, although it's just regularly an on-off toggle, yellow will mean that only objects that are completely encompassed will be selected. Off means objects that are touched by the selection or completely encompassed will be selected. So on means just that purple object will be selected because it's the only object within the selection. Off means everything the selection is either encompassing or touching. In this case, it'll be the tube, that purple cylinder, and the ground plane will be selected. All right. Okay, moving over here, we're going to skip a few buttons because they come along later in the class. We get to our render button. I'm going to right click down here, and this little button way over on the right side is a little teapot. That's our quick render. If I render that, you can see what your scene looks like. So I just click on it and it renders the scene. If you'd like to save your picture, it's this button right here. You click that and you would save your picture as any one of these different formats here. Okay? We're going to get more into saving here in a little bit. Alright, That's all we're going to cover up there for the first day of class. What we're going to do real quick is go through selection sets and how to group these objects together, which is pretty simple. Let's say that I want the sphere and the torus, and I want those two to be part of the same set. I want to move them together. Now, you can hold down Control and click on the other object, or you could use your selection types, although it's easiest just to click on the object, hold down Control, and click on other objects. You can use Alt to subtract an object from that set. So practice that. Click on objects and add them to the set, holding down Control and left clicking. When you find objects in the set that you don't want, you hit Alt. You'll see a little minus appear next to my cursor, and deselect the objects from the set. Now, let's say that these two objects here, these two, we want to be part of a selection set. We go up here to this big blank area, and I'm going to call this sphere and... what was that, a torus? That was a torus. Torus, I think that's spelled right. And hit Enter. That makes a selection set. I'm going to go to Box and Cylinder, and I'm going to name this Box and Cylinder. I think that's right. All right, and then I'm going to grab all objects, and I'm just going to call this all objects. Now, oh, my box, I forgot to do something. If you caught that, that was box and cylinder, remember? I forgot to hit Enter after that. Very important. So this one is box and cylinder. And you have to hit Enter when you're done. If you don't hit Enter, it won't take effect. And now I have all these really neat little selection sets, so I don't have to go back and select those objects. Here's all objects except not ground plane. You can see if I move all objects will move, but the ground plane will stay put. I'll hit Undo to put them back. If I hit box and cylinder, just the box and cylinder are going to move, and I'll put those back. And if I hit sphere and torus, just the sphere and torus are going to move. And they move on any one of the different selection types you want to hit. Remember to hit Undo when you're done. You can also scale them if you want together. Okay? Those are called selection sets. Selection sets can make life really pretty easy. So you can kind of group different, or select different things and make them part of a little selection set. Now there is something else called a group. And what we're going to do now is make a group. I'm going to select anything that looks round from the top. So these objects here all look round to me from the top. I'll grab that guy too. And I'm going to make a group. I'm going to go up to Group, and then Group. And I'm going to name these groups called Round Objects. And I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to select anything that looks square from the top. And in this case, I'm going to grab the teapot as well so that you can see that, well, no, I'm not. I'm trying to get fancy here. Okay. These are the square objects, and I'm going to group these, and these are called square objects. There we go. Now, when I want to grab anything from the group, anytime I grab any part of the group, the whole group will be selected. So here are the round objects, and any round object I click on is going to be part of that group. So groups are useful only if you're done with modeling those parts and pieces, and you kind of want to put them all in one big package. And every time you select one of the pieces of the group, the whole group will be selected. So the difference between selection sets can overlap their members, And you don't have to worry about the whole selection set being selected when you grab one member. Groups just become like one big single object. Now we use both a lot. So whichever one you're comfortable with here in the first couple days, it's not really going to matter how you use them. But once you get started on your projects, you'll probably want to use grouping quite a bit. Now if you want to ungroup something, you just hit ungroup. So you select it and hit ungroup, and now you can see that everything in the group is deselected. These guys are still one big group. I can hit ungroup, and now they're all selected as one object. Okay? So I have no groups in my scene. Another thing to keep track of is if I make these two a group, we'll call this group teapot, they show up as an object. So you can see here is group teapot. If I go back over there and select it, they'll be selected. It acts as an object. So it's a grouping of objects. Okay? I'll ungroup those. All right. I'm going to turn this off, and we'll start. The next one will be the naming files, coordinates, making clones, and a few other things. All right.